when there changes, it's easier to be inward when the world outside is calmer and quieter. Um, so we're gonna begin, and welcome to our fourth session of Ryan. Welcome, Ryan, to our group. And so we're in probably our last session of our Rebbe Nachman, and we spent about four sessions on his work. He was the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, and of all the Hasidic Rebbe's, in some ways, he created the most distinctive spiritual paths, and he was considered an Ilui, a genius in Talmud and Torah, and so in a lot of his spiritual insights, he then couched in a lot of traditional language and forms and theology. And he still has a very big following. His followers tend to be on the lively side. And in Israel, he has his young followers who go around listening to Hasidic dance music, and then he has his older followers who've been for generations in his movement called Breslov, because he was from Breslov. But he was really very creative. We're going to actually start the source sheet from the end and then go to the beginning. And I actually want to, when we're about a third way into our session today, I'm going to be talking about what we started talking about last time, which is this really interesting concept of bitul, of annihilation, which is intense. And Nancy and I had a bit of an email exchange, and it made me think about it. I want to talk about it and how it relates to earlier forms of Judaism and what to think about it, because it's something that not everybody wants to be annihilated. So it's a powerful subject, and we'll get to it. And maybe first to talk maybe more generally for a minute or so about Jewish meditation. In our day, we have a lot of meditation around us in the world. A lot of it's mindfulness, and we have the message that it's good for health, it's good for mental health, it's good for everything, and that type of meditation is probably more similar to Buddhist meditation. That's its origin, and Jewish meditation. Aryeh Kaplan, who was one of the modern thinkers and rabbis who brought back meditation. He had a book called Meditation in the Bible, and his contribution is he very much was sure that the prophets of the Bible were meditators. He said there's no way they could have had those visions if they themselves weren't meditators. And he describes, and there's all kinds of places actually in the Bible where the way the prophets meditate is they put their hand between their knees, right? And there's a few times where Elijah does it and other biblical figures. And because the prophets are in some ways the most elevated spiritual figures of ancient times, the Bible, right? They spoke to God, God spoke through them, they did miracles. And so how did they get to that level, right? How are they able to have this? And so we have stories of God calling on them and turning them into prophets. But we also have hints that there were schools of prophets and that there were groups, communities of prophets. So every single one of them just one day called by God? And so our traditions always had this thought that that's not the case, that that prophetic ideal came not only from suddenly one day hearing God's voice, but that there was a way of teaching it. There was a way of teaching so what did they teach exactly? And the Jewish mystics believed that what they received from teacher to student, that was the secret that went all the way back to the prophets, was the secret lineage of Judaism. And that the core of it was teaching about, the cosmic metaphysics, the cosmic world, and how everything interacts, but also came from meditation, and from that was the means by which the prophets advanced in their spiritual journey to the point where they could hear God's voice, to the point where they could do miracles, to the point. So we sometimes joke, well, at what point did you get your doctorate from your meditation school? Well, it might not have been quite like that, but maybe it wasn't so different that there were these schools. And the Talmud imagines that there were thousands of prophets and hundreds of thousands, and only a few of them whose writings were very poetic, we made it into our books, prophets. But there was a time, and you have all these stories, right, in the books, different books of the Tanakh, where suddenly, right, King Solomon encounters a band of prophets who are singing and making music, and he catches their prophecy, and that kind of suddenly he catches some of their spirit, and that makes him go into a state of an altered state. And there's other moments. So prophets were this big part of ancient times, and kind of were part of the life of the Bible, where there are some of the central figures. And so after that time, all the Jewish renewal spiritual movements often felt that they were going back to prophetic times or bringing forth those practices. And so Abu Lafia, who's a medieval Jewish rabbi and teacher, he's one of the teachers who created the central Jewish meditation of visualizing God's name, Yud He Vav He, and he started that. But we have this idea in the Bible, it says in the Psalms, that the callers of God's name. So we believe that the prophets, they would call out God's name, and that would be a form of prophecy, and a form of, they would do that over and over and over, and that would lead them, so that was a form of meditation. And the Kabbalists had meditations that were very complicated. You take God's 72 letter name, and then you do things in your mind, where you mix it around and send letters this way and that way, and mix it, and there's all these complicated permutations. In the Hasidim, they simplified it. And I think what Rebbe Nachman did and others is they just made it very accessible. Like, this is what it's all it's about, and this is coming from their own experience of meditation. And one of the questions that Nancy, you asked me in the email, if you don't mind me sharing, we said, well, how does meditation relate to prayer very much? And so I think in sometimes we would think, oh, meditation is a form of prayer. I think to Rebbe Nachman, he would say prayer is a form of meditation. He would look at it the other way around, and that's meditation is the way of connecting the most directly to God, and prayer at its best is one of the ways of connecting directly to God. And
it's interesting. I've been reading Leo Strauss's book, his works on Maimonides, which were collected after he died, and he has a big section which I'll send to you on what is prophecy, and according to Maimonides, well, there's 6 qualities of the prophet. 1, a perfect intellect. Okay, perfect intellect, a perfect imagination, perfect morality, and then the 4th thing is courage. You have to have courage to be able to fiddle with this stuff, and predicting the future, and then legislating. So he spends a lot, and he claims, in the Guide for the Perplexed, what he's doing is he's summarizing his insights of the Guide for the Perplexed. But these were, and one had to study and work to achieve at least the first 3, and then maybe who knows about the other stuff. But so intellect, imagination, morality were sort of the 3 key things that the prophets had to work. So, when we were a kid, and my parents say, well, what do you want to do today? I want to go to prophet school like all the other boys, So it wasn't like that, but that was pretty fun.
Well, Maimonides also said in the guide that the best prayer is after your spouse has fallen asleep and you've fulfilled all your things for the day and you're lying in bed, and that's when you can finally turn. And this is he was a rabbi and he prayed 3 times a day with a minion probably and did all of this, but for him, his best prayer meditation really was at the end of it, in his stillness, when everything was done. And his whole, was described to me once, his view of prophecy was, is like a radio receiver. You learn to fine tune your radio receiver until you can receive.
And what they connected to is something called the actual intellect. Okay, the actual intellect medievally was the lowest non-material emanation of the divine. Okay, so that was available. We had a potential intellect as humans. And what you wanted to do is you wanted to sort of get yourself organized so that this actual intellect would connect with you. And, they had this worked out in a way that it didn't
Yeah,
even have to
yeah.
be, it didn't have to be mystical or spiritual, it's sort of a
They said-
practical thing.
These are very practical, but it's interesting because the way I see it all is, every generation, or not every, but many generations discover this and they just give the language and the
Right, they
form
changed the
that
names.
fits what they're experiencing and the culture and the traditions that they're working with and, what gives them names. And so my mind, we can talk about this later too, because it's related to the self-annihilation, but he was working with Greek philosophy and with other forms, and that's the language that he gave to it. But in the East, it's interesting in their understanding of meditation. We think mysticism has mystery in it, right? And so, but they say, it's not mysterious. It's there. It's like science. It's just a subtle science that we don't have the measurement. We don't have the tools to measure yet. It's mysterious to us, but all forms of science were mysterious to previous generations. And so let's go to his very basic. We'll go actually to the very last side, page 4. This is what Rebbe Nachman is best known for, which is hitbodedut. And this is one of his basic descriptions of it in Likutei Moharan, which is Rebbe Nachman's most important work. Likutei means collection of, so it's the collection of the master. Will somebody read, Alan, you're online, but it's still yours, the first reading.
Okay, so are we reading number 6?
Number 6, you got it.
Okay. Set aside an hour or more each day to meditate in a room or in the fields. While there, speak out whatever is in your heart with words of grace and supplication. These words should be in the language you normally speak, so that you will be able to express yourself as clearly as possible. When you entreat God in the language you are used to, the words are closer to your heart and will therefore flow more easily.
Well, right, so we think back in these days everybody spoke perfect Hebrew, and so even this Hasidim, right, for them Yiddish would have been, or maybe for some of them would have been, the language Russian or wherever, Ukrainian. And then, well, how does this? An hour is a long time, obviously, so maybe we could shorten it, busy lives. But what do you think of this practice of just opening your heart, just talking as if God was in front of you?
Does God understand English?
I hope so.
I mean, it's in a way, it's good because it'll force you to do something that you should be doing anyway, taking some time
Yeah,
to think or to vent or whatever it is you need to do.
yeah, exactly. So I know people who do this, and once a day they sit on their chair in their room and they just start to talk. They start to talk to God. They start to talk to God and see what comes up, and doing it with as deep, sincere emotion as you can find. So when you said to vent, that kind of sounds like the therapist, kind of like,
I mean, things that are on your mind that you don't have anybody to tell,
yeah,
a way to do it.
yeah,
I told you about that client before who insisted that God spoke back to her.
yeah.
She's writing a book about it, how God spoke to her. So who are we to say she's not right?
Most of the time, well, when you get older, you don't fall asleep that quickly, so that's a perfect time.
Yeah.
Try to do that when it's dark and it's quiet.
That's right.
It's a good way to clear your mind. Well, in the Shema, when it says you should say the Shema when you rise up, when you lying down and when you rise up, right? That's part of the Shema. And a beautiful kavanah, intention set when you say those words, when you lie down, is that if you do say the Shema before you go to sleep, that you should take all of your thoughts from that day, all the stuff, all the stories, all the stuff that's been bothering you, all the conversations, kind of like make a little package, give it off to God. give up the before you go to sleep, and that's a way of. I mean, that's what the Shema is meant to be in that sense, right? Before you go to sleep, you say a prayer. It's helping you to clear away your whole day. And same thing in the morning, before all your thoughts come rushing in, you say the Shema, that helps connect you. That helps before all our days, which take up all of our minds and getting everything done. And so if you say the Shema before you get up, right before you go to sleep, then with an intention, it's hard to do sometimes, but that's a little formative. But he's expanding this out, right? Just talk, talking. Unless you want your direct, if you have a place where you could do it in your mind, or you could do it out loud. Out loud, it's.
How about you're risking the
I was
psychiatry
gonna
police?
say, yes, a little bit.
So what you wanna do, if you wanna do it out loud, you put some earphones on, so people think you're talking to somebody else.
Yes, right. These days, when the earbuds first came out, right, everybody can see the headphones in fact, but
Yeah,
all these
this is
people
a
are
consummate
So many
sugar.
people are crazy.
so many people are crazy. But you know, when people the practice when people do this, you know, if you so hitbodedut is what this is called. If you Google hitbodedut or put on YouTube, you'll find all kinds of. There's a whole movie that's been done about it. I mean, there's lots of things. It's very popular in Israel and other places. But people really cry out. You know, it's like they're putting your whole being into it.
People even that when they're in trouble or angry or something, so it's better to do it all the time.
Yeah, so you have
And
a
then you
practice.
unload all the stuff you're carrying around.
Exactly. Jay, go ahead.
So is there, it's kind of adding on or maybe going on a little side quest from this. Is there so this is what I do. Like I go for hikes, like I walk, I don't know, 15 miles a day about every day, hike or walk, and most of the time I'm contemplating, meditating, thinking. I mean, I'll even, I mean, I pray 3 times a day, and it'll be, you know, after afternoon, I'll go for like an hour walk afterwards, and when I can think or connect to God or just the world better after that when I'm walking. And I do out loud, I talk out loud to myself, and my neighbors think I'm crazy. And I actually put AirPods in with no music, with just noise canceling, because I like to dull one of my senses so I can concentrate more. But to me, it's that physical. This like when we rock, like rocking when you pray, the moving.
Sure.
You're occupying to me, you're occupying the physical body, so the spiritual part of you is it doesn't have to worry about that. So with me, walking is kind of the same thing for it. It seems to like it helps you increase your Kavanaugh when you're not having to worry about anything with your hands or fidgeting, because you're automatically walking, or like, and that's what got me with this was being in the meditating in a room or in a field, like in an empty room. It for me it's difficult, but in a field or a street or somewhere where you can occupy your body, seems like it's more spiritual to me, because you don't have to worry about that.
Just occupying part of your body, it's occupying part of your mind.
Right.
It's the one that always got me. Right?
It's true. Yeah. When it is the walking meditation is the whole thing, right? And so, but I agree for a lot of people, you know, you go for a walk and it helps you clear your mind, and especially if you're in a beautiful place, you know.
I use the same technique. Same thing, walking. Some of my most interesting insights are when I'm walking.
Remember things too. I used to have to walk every day. I used to have to like carry a pen and pad because I would think of things and I didn't want to forget them.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the beautiful. I think, you know, it comes to us naturally on some level, and we seek it out because we need it. So let's read the last bit, and then we're going to go back to the front. Rebbe Natan, who's a follower of Rebbe Nachman, his main disciple. And so here it's imagine. It's not imagine the high priest, but it's imagine. Imagine. Someone read for us. 7.
Imagine the high priest entering the Holy of Holies is likened to the person who sits and pours out his heart before God.
So it's a sense of the power of right, the high priest entering the Holy of Holies is the holiest moment, the holiest person, the holiest place, right? That's what we say about that moment on Yom Kippur. And because that's the closest you can get to the divine presence. And so Rebbe Nachman said that you can achieve that by just opening your heart, intentionally talking to God. You can achieve that same closeness. And for people who do this, I have to admit, I mean, I love walking as well. I'm doing that, but I don't do hitbodedut. I don't just pour out my heart and speak for half an hour. I know people who do, it's not my thing. But I said there must be a practice element where day after day, if you do it, you get this sense of getting closer and closer and, to the core of your being, into a place where you're in that relationship place, which is beautiful. Okay, now let's go to the front. And I want to talk a little bit about this. Actually, sorry, before we even get to number one, I want to get to number three. We're going to do number three first. Rebbe Nachman gave a lot of just general, and we've reviewed some of them before, guidelines for meditation. Somebody read number three for us.
When the negative side strongly overwhelms a person and really confuses his mind with many kinds of negative thoughts and confusing ideas, so that it is very hard to vanquish it. He needs to annihilate himself completely before God, because every person has the capacity to temporarily annihilate himself completely. That is, to shut his mouth and eyes and remove his mind completely, as if he has no mind or ability to think at all. Just total surrender of the self before God.
So it's interesting because you were saying that, or you were saying that about the walking, right? When you're walking, it shuts down part of the mind, right? And Jay, you were talking about, the buds and removing one of the senses, and so that, so what's this idea of self-annihilation? And Nancy and I exchanged, as mentioned, emails about it, and how does it relate to earlier forms of Jewish prayer, right? The Psalms and which in the Psalms are really, you're talking one-on-one with God, right? There's a you and there's an I and a thou in that. And so I thought, one is we do have this stream within our tradition going all the way back to Abraham of the smallness of being a human being, right? I'm dust and ashes, right? That's what Abraham says, right? What am I? I'm nothing compared to the grandeur, the overwhelming grandeur of God, right? That's a really strong strand in our tradition. And Abraham talks about that, right? And we say in the Aleinu prayer, which we have at every service, we say, Ein od, there is no other but God. And so what's that saying is that the extent of God is everything. And what are we compared to that? We're just like, we're nothing. We're a spark of God. We're made in the image of God, but that there is something about us that we're so small. We're dust and ashes, and that's always been there. It's part of monotheism. Maybe this is what Abraham brought to the world, right? That there's that midrash about Abraham when he was 3 years old, right? 3 years old, but he's like looking up and he's looking up at the stars and looking up at the sun and saying, well, this must be the creator of the world. But then the sun goes down and says, no, you can't be the creator of the world. And then the stars go up and the moon. He says, well, you must be, but then the stars and the moon disappear. And he says, well, there must be something that created all of this. And then kind of he asks this question, who created these? Who created these? Who created these? And eventually came to this sense of the overwhelmingness of God as creator. And that's linked, I think, to annihilation. And in Kabbalah, there's a sentence that's said often, and it ends up in some of our prayers, Ein od milvado. There is no other except for God. There is no other except, there's nothing else but God. There's nothing else but God. And they say this, there's a sentence that God surrounds all worlds and fills all worlds. And so if you want to give it panentheistic, right, in this way scholars talk about it, but they're just speaking about an experiential idea of God filling absolutely everything and everything. So when you contemplate that, that's what leads to think, well, what is myself, right? And so kind of it leads to this sort of practice of, well, who am I? What is myself compared to that overwhelming, grandeur and all-encompassing reality of the divine. And another aspect is, maybe that some of what the Hasidim brought, just like every generation, was new to Judaism, right? And some of the practices that we're going to read at the front of the thing did bring maybe the practice of bitul, which is what the Hasidim call it, which does mean annihilating oneself. Maybe that was on some level a new practice. It didn't exist in Judaism, and this happened many times. Maimonides, he brought Greek philosophy more intensely into Judaism, and even the very first rabbis, right? They were immersed in the Greek world, and they brought Greek ways, even as they were in tension with it. But within the tension, they absorbed ways of thinking which helped Judaism survive the destruction of the temple with Greek logic. And Yishmael has 13 concepts of how to analyze the Torah by Yishmael. There's all these different, so that it's how we traditionally compare ourselves to the Karaites, right? The Karaites at the time, right, of the temples, they didn't believe in what the rabbis were doing. They wanted to preserve, sacrifices and only the Torah. But the rabbis said, hey, Judaism, you got to evolve. We're no longer the same people as we were 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago. You have to evolve. And so I think the part of Judaism, and sometimes it's brought from the outside, sometimes it's brought from the inside. And I think that the Hasidim, I don't think they were bringing this from anywhere else in their situation, right? Maimonides' son and grandson have contact with the Sufi Muslims, and they say they brought practices and there are other times where there've been outside practices. But I think in the Hasidim, I doubt that they had much contact with Orthodox Christianity in Ukraine, or that was not a very good relationship usually with the outside community at that time. And so it really came from their own explorations and their own sense, and they couched it in their own language. And maybe, part of, right, the Hasidim come out of Shabbatai Tzvi, right? Shabbatai Tzvi was a false messiah right before the Hasidim, at a time when the Jewish people were looking for newness and something new. And Shabbatai Tzvi, was a false messiah, and he converted to Islam, and he really created a lot of I'm missing the word, a lot of disappointment in the Jewish community, right? Because they expected, people sold their houses thinking that they were going to go to Jerusalem and the Messiah was here. And so the Hasidim, they were really working from within Judaism. And that was part of what they needed to do to heal Eastern European Judaism at that moment, and they succeeded.
How are you defining annihilate here?
I was gonna
Yeah,
say.
that's the stick.
Not killing, but I mean,
But like removing your ego.
Removing your ego,
This is
yeah.
what we're talking about all the time,
Yeah.
is getting out of your
Yeah.
own way.
Yeah, getting out of your own way.
Quieting that part of your brain. I mean, that's an Eastern meditation.
That needs some meditation too, yeah.
All Eastern, Western, everybody has reached the same kind of thing. In the East, they call it different names. They have energy centers in the East. So the biggest energy center is, it starts with an M that's on the top of the head.
Crown.
And
We have it too.
everybody's wearing on his crown, he's wearing a yarmulke on his crown, because that's apparently a holy place and you feel something there. So I think
Can I say something?
humanity all over and in all times has found these things, has found these kinds of non-material experiences, not things that don't correspond to vision, hearing, etc. And since they don't correspond to these things, the names are going to be completely subjective and according to the culture that we live in. Because, we have a common name for a cup. I mean, different translations in different languages, because the thing exists outside of us, we think. But the spiritual stuff is strictly internal, so it's completely subjective,
So,
and it's real.
Michelle,
Can I say something?
Michelle, yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to say when you use that word, I might not be able to pronounce it all that great because I stutter sometimes. But I find that sometimes when I want to control my emotions, sort of like if you're talking to somebody when you're going to the doctor or something, and then you can pick up that this person has a attitude, and then they giving you the business, and sometimes I have to remember to think to myself that in the scripture that it says a soft answer will turn away wrath. So sometimes I just kind of find myself trying to just trying to be polite, and then that's kind of the way that I kind of like try to meditate on our scripture by trying to put it into practice,
Mhm.
and
Well, I
just to see how things work, because I kind of found out for myself, it seems since this COVID thing happened, it seems like people are ruder and more meaner.
Well, there's nothing like, being in a hard situation to put your meditation into practice, right? So when you're facing something difficult, it's that's when all the work you do comes into practice, as they say. So I really relate to that. So I think that the one thing I want to add to what we're saying is that in the Hasidic view and Kabbalistic view to some degree, which it's really interesting, because on one hand, Judaism has this theological view of history that the spiritual high point of history was Mount Sinai, and since then we're going downhill, and that's called Yeridat HaDorot. It's called the downfall of generations. That's kind of a traditional idea. But on the other hand, it's the opposite. And the Kabbalists and the Hasidim believed in spiritual evolution, and that's that our ability to reach the infinite is actually evolving with every generation and going more and more. And that's and that on some level, yes, we're all from every culture, every tradition, every religion is, kind of rediscovering the same things, but from their point of view. But those have this other understanding, and that's that those things are not always available for humanity. That actually humanity's ability as our intellect, maybe Maimonides is growing, as our social cohesion, as the basic level of how we treat each other is hopefully growing. That opens up new spiritual spheres, and that certain spiritual teachers actually open up new channels into the divine. So there's a whole idea, like different teachers open up like a pipeline. And then once they've opened up that pipeline, people after them can follow down that pipeline. So they say that Moses in his time opened up the pipeline of fearlessness, of going to God, of fearlessness, and other teachers, opened up other things. And so that first of all, I think one thing that's very interesting is, despite what we may think about the prophets or about anybody, you never know if your internal experience is similar to anybody else's, right? So they're describing something, and so you might, on some level, maybe there is a one universal experience that one can reach at the very bottom of all of it, but then there's many other levels of experience, as many shades of them as there are people, maybe, even as there are maybe benchmarks through all of it, but and so could be that the Hasidim entered into some kind of space that they made available to us by studying and even by doing all the other things that they do, and just got incorporated into the mishmash of Judaism that's always evolving, right? And of a place that we can reach, and it's part. And I think about what's happening on the outer level of Judaism, there's also the inner level, and in fact, the Chabad is such a big part of general Judaism now. What does that bring into the general Judaism? And the songs of Shlomo Karlebach, which are what we do sing here a lot of the time, and that maybe opened up certain things in general Judaism mainstream. So everything is,
And it
Okay.
not only opens up things in Judaism, but it opens up things in mathematical physics and physics, quantum mechanics, all of these ideas, which are very, very spiritual things as the modern world moves in that direction, you could attribute to the Hasidim if you wanted to. You know, that they sort of opened up the possibility of this particular view of the infinite. And then, and by the way, I happen to know that mathematical physics people study all of this stuff for ideas, etc. And what they're looking for, like the guys who made up the quarks, the notion of quarks, which is now very old-fashioned. But anyway, what they're looking for is they're looking for new renditions of this. So it's quite possible that you could maybe attribute quantum mechanics to the Hasidim, if you wanted to.
well,
Can I go back to Michelle's comment for a minute? And Michelle, if I didn't interpret it right, please correct me. But what I took from Michelle's comment was that we are living in the world with people. Okay, we are part of a society, and this practice that we're studying this morning is very individualized. It's between ourselves and the divine. And I'm having difficulty with the idea of connecting with the divine while I'm still living in the world with people. I can't divorce myself from society and what society, the world that society creates for me, that I am part of, that I have to live in physically, and provides the framework that I must use in order to deal with the divine. And I'm having difficulty letting go of the world because it structures how I think about the divine. Does that make any sense? In order to remove my ego to commune with the divine. I'm always stuck. I'm always a little bit stuck in.
Can I say something about that?
Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, my thing is that everybody has different experiences in the world. And to me, when you're different, people love to give you the business, because I don't know if you remember, like last week that I was telling you that I was born with a disorder of the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does, it causes tumors to form in my body, out my body. I can't do anything about it. So you know, sometimes when people look at me, they want to misjudge me. And I know that the business is coming. So my thing is this: God created me. If you have a problem with the way that I look, you talk to God about that. The only thing that I can do is show people is my personality, and I lean on that a lot, because I find that people love to talk about me and make fun of me, and that makes other people fly along with it, like that saying that birds of a feather flock together. So I basically that's the reason why, like, I form my personality the way that I do.
Well, it's so, you know, I'm so sorry you have to go through that, and your perspective is really inspiring. I've got to say, the fact that you know that you're able to look at it that way and not feel hate for those people is incredible, and so I salute you for that. And I think that you know, the part of all this practice of self-annihilation is saying that there's something beyond the outer layer of what's happening in this world that's more important, and that's where you find the real solace. And I think, Nancy, that what Laura was saying is that, you're not meant to go out of the world forever with this. It's just supposed to give you something to help you in the rest of your life when you're in the universe. And I think we're about to do the Lekh Lekha practice of Rebbe Nachman. But what are the first words that God says to Abraham? He says, leave everything you know, right? He says, leave your society, leave where you come from, leave and go on a journey, go find something else. And so, I think sometimes you have to leave to come back, right? And I feel sometimes in our society we're worried about that, but we think, oh, if you're a great musician, of course it makes sense. You should go and spend a year and come up with the best album of all time in some secluded space. Or if you're a writer, of course you should go out and spend a year writing the best novel of all time. But we don't like this idea of spending time. And I think that he's talking about, moments in your day, or and that the vision is that the moving beyond the ego should allow you to then navigate the world in the place where you're not getting the ego battle with other people, but you're from your best place. Barbara.
I do want to pick up on that notion of what's exactly what you're saying, but to put it in those terms of relationship.
Yeah.
I am feeling, as we're talking, that it is so individual.
It is also,
and yet it isn't, because in every passage that we've read, it's to be in relationship with the other, with God, with the thou, the I, thou, and that we aren't individual. And in getting to that experience, it's a rethinking of who you are. I mean, so we are talking so much about thinking here, which is I think, therefore I am. And there are both Buber and Venus as philosophers would basically say, I am called by the other, therefore I am. That you have to be open to the face of the other. And that's in your world too. You bring that back to your world. You'll never stay in that transcendental place. You can't. And that's what people say. I mean, that's, you have mostly I-it relationships, but you bring that notion because you've changed yourself, that you're making yourself open to that call. You won't always get it, but being open to it means that you aren't just you because you think,
and
you're you because of the other.
And
I think that's a really important way to readjust yourself.
And the moment of I Tao is something you never forget, right?
No,
when you have I Taos, you don't forget them because they mark you and they change your life. You don't know what to do with them,
Yeah.
Well, but you're going through the whole world, right? So Buber had this whole thing, mostly even with other people, we're in I-it, even with our loved ones, you're not in the moment of feeling connected at that deeper level. You're just like an object, an it, right? And so, even you relate to people, but then every now and then you have a moment with a person, or you would say with an object, or something, you're like, wow, we're one. I sometimes talk about when, one of the time when I first was away from my daughter, maybe I came to the airport and she was with my wife, and my son was a baby, and she saw me and she ran towards me and said, Abba. She jumped, and I realized her and I were one, in that moment. So that's like, that's the kind of thing where you feel a sense of complete oneness.
And that's an annihilation.
Yeah, and that's an annihilation, right?
It's
it
not
is.
a clockwork.
It's not. It just happened.
Yourself into it.
Exactly. Those are ones that I think beautiful insight. Yeah, that's an annihilation, because for that moment I'm not in myself. I'm one with my daughter, or with the universe. Really, it's not just with her. With the beautiful.
When
But I
was
have a question.
Go ahead.
Jay, go ahead first, and then Misham.
Was talking about kind of building on what Nancy said with people. We're in a society with people, and I did 93 days without talking, hearing, or seeing another person in 2022. 93 days, and annihilation is a good word. I always described it as I melted, and it was just me. I mean, there was nobody. It was me and a dog in the middle of nowhere with no electronics, no television. And I didn't hear another human voice besides my own for 93 days. and by the end of it, you can feel like there's so many distractions normally in the world that you can't connect with anything. And by the end of it, I think Annihilation is probably the best. I've never even thought of it like that, where I could feel an animal walking like down the road or on my property, and then look out the window and be like, oh yeah, no, there's this squirrel that I saw yesterday. Before you could feel everything. You could feel when a breeze was coming, when it was going to rain. It was crazy, and you just kind of melted away and became one with everything. And actually, funny enough, when you saw your daughter and she ran up and you felt one with her, the first time I saw a person, that was my mailman. I went down to go get my mail, and I saw him, and I saw him, and I'd never seen him before. I saw him, and I just gave him a big hug. And I said, how are you? And he just said, I'm really great. How are you? And then we never saw each other again. But I randomly hugged a mailman because I finally saw a person. But yeah, no, annihilate is a really good word for that.
So Jay, how long did it take you to reach that point of self-annihilation? I mean, you were there 93 days, but at what point did you realize that isolation, not isolation, but that singularity?
It was definitely after 30 days. I lost track of time for a while. I didn't have a clock or anything. Or I didn't have a calendar. So I lost track of time a little bit. But it was definitely after a month. First week was hard. Second week was, I thought I was just crazy for doing it. And then after about 30 days is when I kind of stopped like thinking about anything. It's when I stopped thinking about myself completely after about a month. Yeah.
Okay. And Rabbi Nachman is saying take an hour, and it took you 30 days. I'm struggling with that hour.
I think to me, it's because we have so many distractions. You can jump on your phone nowadays, you can jump on your phone. So it's harder to just connect with an hour. That's why it took me so long. But if you're 400 years ago where you don't have electricity, it's easy to shut off everything in hours. You're already majority of the way there.
It's also, I mean, not everybody has the constitution to do what you did, Jay, you know, and what you did is amazing. And the others, but what she's proposing is a way of doing this every day a little bit, so you get some benefit of it. And the only way to see how it works is to try it out, right?
Well, I'll make
so-
a plug for going to synagogue. What
Yeah.
do they say? You onge go twice a year, you only have 2 times to try and
Yeah,
make that
exactly.
connection with
Yeah,
God. If you're
that's
there
true.
every day,
Yeah,
365
yeah,
tries, you know.
that's very true. Well, let's read the first text, because this is in some way the central text I wanted to get to.
First one.
The very first one, the first page. Anybody want to read for us? So it's based on Lekh Lekha, right? This is the first words that God says to Abraham, chapter 12 of Genesis, where Lekh Lekha is often translated as going for yourself or go out. And that's when he tells Abraham, leave Ur Kasdim and go to Canaan. But the rabbis pick up, even the pre-Hasidic, the Lekh Lekha means go to yourself. That's actually what those words mean. Go. Those are the first words of God to Abraham. Really, the first words that begin the Jewish path, right? The whole of Judaism begins with the words "go to yourself." Whenever, and so we don't always think about it. And maybe going back to what Nancy was saying earlier, we always have different visions of what Judaism is or was, and going to yourself as the foundation of Judaism has not been the emphasis, maybe in modern Judaism for a while, but it would have been obvious to the people who heard Lekh Lekha, around a campfire 3,000 years ago, what Lekh Lekha means, So who's reading for us? Number one.
And this is what the Holy Blessed One said to Abraham, hinting also to all human beings in the world. Lekh Lekha, go to yourself. He's exhorting every person to go to his self, because the essence of a human being, what is called his I, is only the soul only. And also, when we speak to a person who is present before us and say to him, you, or go, we essentially are referring to his soul, which is the essence of a person, as is known. And this is what it means.
When God says, go from your country, God, so in that statement, God says, go to yourself, right? And go from your parents' home, from your land, from the land of your birth, from your father's house to the land that I will show you. So he's going through that statement in the Torah. Go ahead.
From your country, specifically, go out from your earthiness and physicality. Go out from whatever earthiness and physicality you have fallen into, from which it seems hard to get out. And this is what it means. From your birthright, from how you were born, from whatever condition of materiality you were born into, even though this too may seem a great obstacle to you, and from your father's house, which is your family, relative, neighbors, and acquaintances with whom you grew up, because they too create obstacles in different ways to your serving God. From all these, you need to get out and go to yourself, to your soul. This is what it means to the land that I will show you, which is the land of Israel, which is the embodiment of holiness, because there is the temple and there is the source of all souls.
And so here he means the symbolic land of Israel on some level, but he's saying that there's a process of, when he's saying going out from your families and neighbors and relatives, he doesn't necessarily mean literally. He means go out from all the thoughts who are you really, and how much of it was just came in through nurture and through everything that you came up, and what's beyond all of that? There's a place of you that's beyond everything you received from your parents, from your community, and what is that place? And to go further and further and further and further. And so I'm saying I'm gonna try and do this practice. This is my father's practice. He kind of put it into a meditative practice based on this teaching. And so if anybody's open to doing it, I'd like to lead it here for 5 minutes, our last 5 minutes. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. But since we've been talking about it, might as well put it into some kind of action, right? If you'd like to follow this practice, I'd like to invite you to find a comfortable position from which you won't have to move too much, and just settle into your chair. You can put your hands together or on your knees and close your eyes. And just try and let go of all the tension in the body, relaxing toes and feet and legs and arms, and just settling into our chair. And just to begin by breathing in and out and watching the movement of the breath, trying to let go of all conversation within us, and just try the best we can as we begin the meditation to just observe that gentle and natural movement of the breath. And put all of our attention on watching just our breath, like a door that's opening and closing, and opening and closing. And as soon as we have a thought that arises in our mind, like, what am I doing today, or about a certain person, or about noise, or how am I ever going to succeed with this or do that? To try and pay no attention to that thought, but to just say to our own mind, Lekh Lekha, go to yourself. To tell to our own being, go to yourself. Not trying to find that self, but just try and plunge deep within, beyond whatever emotion is associated with that thought, beyond the content of that thought, to our very core. Just to continue and breathe whenever a thought comes up. Say to that thought, Lekh Lekha, go to yourself. Telling the mind to go beyond whatever else is there. Every time emotion or desire or thought comes, we don't have to unpack it and think what it means, but we simply say, go to yourself, go beyond that thought, go to its source, to the real us. Just command your own self, Lekh Lekha. No matter how many times a thought arises, keep saying, Lekh Lekha, keep going back. Whatever thought or emotion or story, we'll keep going back to the Lekha, to ourself. The self that's beyond all those thoughts, all those emotions, that has no words, just who we are. Not just an experience, a state of being. And try and follow that thread deeper and deeper, retracing to the source of all those thoughts. Lekh Lekha. We're not striving to some upper level of connection, but we're deeply interiorizing ourselves. Trying to extinguish every thought, every worry, every feeling as soon as it comes up. Lekh Lekha. Until we get to that place where there is no thought, just endless abundance and endless well, peace, stillness, and of silence. It's from that place of deep stillness and silence, retracing all our thoughts and feelings, very source of it all, the Chai, our own self, that experience that our real self arises. Begin to come back to external awareness. You're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you, everyone. See you next week.
Talking to God's children,
Thank you.
talking to God.